So I thought what I'd do real quick is just show you kind of like where this came from. How did I wind up with this image? And this right here is 100 NEF. This is the image that I had. So the NEF is essentially for Nikon shooters is raw, right? So the NEF means this is the raw version of that image. This is a copy of that image, and really what I'm trying to do here, this has been reset. Let me go back over to my develop settings. So this is what it looked like coming out of the camera. Okay, this is no edits or anything. What this bright light is over here, that's me painting the front of this building. Okay, and then you can't see it, but what I did was in a 30-second exposure, actually this one's 25 seconds, at 3200 ISO, f2.8, I triggered my shutter, I ran over here, lit the front of the building, turned the light off, went around inside the building, turned the light back on so that I got some light here. And when we're up there, I will show you how you do that, okay, from a light painting standpoint, and then turned it off. This was on for probably a second and a half, 2 seconds on the front of the building, and a second and a half or 2 seconds on the inside of the building. So from a light painting standpoint, I'll show you what I use too. I've got these LED panels, and I have 3 of them, so you guys get the chance to play around with it. You can try it yourself, see how it works, okay? I've also done, and I don't have it in here, but first time we came out, I've used a flashlight before, cupped in my hand. I've used a headlamp, you know, the headlamp that you can use. I've just used one of those and just kind of did like this with it. So any source of light can be used. Tonight, assuming we're shooting stars or anything else, somebody's going to screw up everyone's shot because they're going to turn their light on while somebody else has. So you just have to be a little cognizant. Say, hey, is anyone open? Is anyone open? All right? And if somebody's open, then you just wait. And once their shutter closed, okay, we're good to go, and you turn it on, whatever. The other thing is, and I've seen this happen at another workshop, especially if you're painting, you get in a hurry and you're like, okay, here we go, boom. And what you do, you knock over 2 people's cameras by hitting their tripods and stuff. So just be very aware of where you're at and stuff, because it's dark. And for the most part, we don't want lights, right? So just have to be slow, patient in what you're doing. One thing to keep in mind is that we're probably not going to be taking 300 images. The whole point is to try to get your composition and stuff and try to get 1 or 2 good quality images that you think this is good for me to work with, okay? So patience, I think I put it in an email, patience is a big part of this. Not only because the sky looks cloudy and everything, but if you're patient, you experience this, clouds move away, the stars come out, and you're halfway home. Patience. Same thing with processing. In particular, when I first got started processing, I would apply whatever effect I was applying, I would apply it all at once. And I've learned over time to use a soft brush and low flow and just gradually layer it on until you get to where you want to go in certain circumstances. So anyway, you can see obviously here that I don't have foreground. See this foreground right here. So essentially what I did was, this is another image where I took and I painted this foreground area on purpose. I wasn't sure 100% that I was going to need it, but when I said earlier about being purposeful for blending purposes, right, understanding what you might need, I went ahead and shot this and gave me a foreground that was lit up enough so that if I needed it, I could use it, right? So anyway, blending all of that together, you'll also notice, let's go back, so this is the main image. See how everything's kind of leaning in a little bit? It's perspective. And you can use the transform tool here and these little guides. You just click on that thing right there, and if you take and you drag a line along there, and you drag a line along there, and then it straightens them up for you. Okay, now, if we go up to the top here, let me tell it's done. Look at this corner up here. Look at how it stretches everything out. So if you're going to use that, if you decide, yeah, I want to use that tool and straighten these up, you're probably going to be cropping out up here and over on the sides. You're going to have to do some adjustments, and you'll wind up with something that looks, you can get to a point where you're like this. Even in these upper corners up here, I've got some of that stretching going on. But for the whole image, I was willing to accept that little bit of blur that I had in the upper corner. It gets back to what I said earlier about what's the focal point. Is it the Milky Way, or is it this? This is what people are really going to notice, and they're not going to be looking in this upper left corner to see that the stars are a little blurred. I was just at a workshop in Big Bend, and the guy that taught it, his name's Mike Mazul, and we had a lot of discussion around the fact that the Milky Way is simply a backdrop, no different really than if you were in a studio and had a painted background and you were just shooting against it, right? I mean, that's what it is. It's a very beautiful background.
So on this photograph here, are you telling me now that on that photograph right there,
yes,
you light painted that?
yes,
It's not one added to. You didn't shoot part of it, then added something.
in this image, what you've got is, is this image right here. So this is the raw image that I took. The only thing that I did was I used one of these two, and I don't remember which one it was, that one or this one, to add just enough foreground so that my building wasn't right at the very bottom of the image. And it's dark enough, again, no one's really going to notice, right? I blended this bottom so that the building would be a little bit higher. So basically, I'm going to be blunt here. I did a really crappy composition job. Let's just be honest. That's what it is. I didn't give myself near enough foreground for this image. I didn't do it. The reason I shot these was because I knew that. And so then I went in and said, well, I need some foreground material. So I recomposed and shot something that would give me enough foreground that I could add it later, knowing that this area down at the bottom of that building was going to be dark and not a focal point, and that it would be easy to blend without it being obvious that, hey, this is a really sucky, composition job. So that's how that image came to be.
Where's the light coming from behind you?
This light?
No, behind the building.
This light right here?
The glow in the back.
Oh, that's Albany.
I didn't think it was big enough to produce that light.
Oh, you can see towns from miles away that have 140 people in them, and they light up the sky. Now, this is a TIFF file, which means that it came out of Photoshop, okay? So in Photoshop, the things that I did was add this foreground, likely. Debbie, you, and maybe you, Janelle, would have probably in there added this contrast, this mid-tone contrast and everything on the building. By the way, in the final version of this image, this hot spot right here I got rid of. This is too bright. It kind of pulls your eye away, and I toned that down in the final image that I created, that if I was going to sell it, that's where it would go. But the reason that's a hot spot is because it's closer to where this light was inside, and it just picked up more of the reflected light. So, and that's where I was getting a little rushed and wasn't patient with it and anxious to show everyone, look at this picture. And I missed this piece right here. So I shot this one after the Big Ben workshop, which was in mid-July. And I was early enough in the evening that I already had some moonlight coming down here. And it's amazing how much light the moon casts on things, especially if you're open for 30 seconds at an ISO of 3200. It looks like daylight outside, right? So most of this was moonlighting. Right here, this is me painting. You can see this light right here. I didn't do a very good job of this. Matter of fact, yeah, I've done a little bit of editing, but not a lot. I've got the plane. There's planes here all over the place, right? But this right here is from me, using a LED panel and painting some light on the foreground. So I didn't do a very good job of it here, but I've seen images and was trying to recreate an image or come close to an image that I've seen where the tree was almost perfectly lit and you had the Milky Way in the right spot and whatnot. This is Mars, by the way. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what's going on in the night sky, but it'll be about 15 years before it looks like this again. So this is from last night, and see this kind of magenta tone? We have a drone, and Barry taped a LED light to the bottom of it, hovered it inside there. I opened my shutter, and then he just took off with it. Now, the problem with it is that LED light's nice and white, right? But the aeronautical lights on the drone are red, and we couldn't figure out how to turn them off. And so we have this pink cast, and I haven't got rid of it yet, but still working on it. But one of the things I want to show you, we pull up out here to the building, and this is, so you got two experienced photographers, and we're in the dark, and we're going, all right, we're going to set up, and we're going to do something fun. Now, Barry, at this point in time, is working on getting the drone set up, and I just set up my camera and popped a picture off. And knowing that, the thing about the night sky and shooting the night sky is if it's relatively dark, your settings are almost always going to be the same. ISO 3200, f2.8, 14 millimeter, 30 seconds, 25 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever. I know that for me. It doesn't matter whether I'm in Big Bend or I'm somewhere else. That's what I'm going to set my camera at, and that's how I get it, right? Tonight, hopefully we'll have some stars, and we'll learn what that setting is for your camera with that lens. So no matter where you go, if you're setting up to shoot stars, here's the settings I go to. And I'm going to get a raw file that I can use to then create a nice Milky Way. So I set up, shot a couple, obviously corrected my leveling. Then Barry flies the drone around. And we're like, oh, that's kind of cool, except it's in the image, right? Yeah. You should write with it. You're going to have to learn how to fly better. So anyway, so then we get over and we try to light it, and he was surprised. We had it just out of the deal, but it was amazing how much light that it still cast onto it, and it was pretty low. So then we had him take it higher up and further back over the building, and it still looks kind of cool. And if you crop it, my guess is we could make something kind of interesting out of that. We tried moving it a little bit further forward to get a little light on the front of the building. So then, and here we go, we're like getting a little better. And then we started getting this weird red glow. And we're like, man, these red lights on this drone are crazy bright. And then we shot another one, and it was like, man, this is weird. And I looked at Barry, and he still got his red headlight on.
I was doing that to demonstrate a point. Tonight, when we go out there, leave your damn headlight.
So anyway, so the point of all of that is to don't be too hard on yourself when you're shooting. You're going to goof up. You're going to go, you know what, laugh a little bit, have some fun with it. You can see, though, it's kind of interesting, an interesting look. And, well, I haven't played with it, but this is obviously a place where I would use Photoshop, because in Lightroom, for those that use Lightroom, if you try to make color adjustments in here, they're global. They affect the entire screen, right? You can use a brush to adjust saturation and things like that. You can actually, there's a way, you can use a color brush in here if you want to. It gets a little complicated. I'm not going to go into it right now. It might be something I cover in a tip. But this is one where I don't like this color tint in here, and I will try to change that. But I thought it was interesting. You know, Barry suggested, hey, let's fly around with the drone and see what we can come up with, and we wind up getting some pretty interesting images using the drone. The battery went dead far quicker than we really wanted to. So yeah, the Longhorns yesterday, Barry and I were out there, and Barry's waving his arms to get them to look up because they were just too busy munching on prickly pear cactus. I guess that's what they like to eat.
Supposed to rattle a paper bag.
Yep. We didn't have a paper bag with us, but so the point I want to show here is get familiar, and I'm not saying you're going to be able to do it here for necessarily, but be familiar with the dynamic range of your camera. And what I mean by that is understand how dark you can shoot something and still bring out the shadows and get detail and stuff in it, right? Or the hides. Does anyone in here use a histogram when they're shooting? You do? Janelle, I'm sure you know what it is. No.
I know what it is. I use it when I'm processing, but not.
Okay.
Histogram when you're shooting is really, 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 really good. So you'll want to start to learn how to look at that histogram after every shot to see, okay, I'm within range. It's really
Is
good.
it similar to using the meter while you're shooting?
Well,
I mean, I know it's more in depth.
Yeah, it's
obviously.
good. It's going to, I mean, the histogram is going to change. You know, how you change your meter. But it's giving you the real live data where they're not clipping things off. Like this histogram on the top right of the screen, all that super heavy loaded off to the left, the shadow side of the image.
I shot at 800 ISO. I'm at 280 millimeters f4, and actually this was probably because what I had was a 70 to 200 lens with a 1.4 teleconverter on it, so I lost a stop in there. So maybe it was f4 actually. 1/640th of a second. Are you all familiar with, if you've got a 300 millimeter lens, you need to be shooting at least 1/300th of a second to avoid shake, right? So anyway, but I felt comfortable shooting that because I knew that with my camera I had enough range to bring out, you know, I could get it bright enough to do what I wanted to do. And I've not finished processing this. You can see this noise in here. I'll go in and eliminate that. But the reason I added this particular image into these to show you is that shooting night, and in particular if you're around sunsets and stuff like that, being comfortable with having an image where you're exposing more for the highlights and letting the darks be there, that knowing that you can bring them out in post-processing. Okay?
So was this later at night?
We shot
It was sunset, and the sun was setting.
this was at 8:18, so it was almost an hour, no, 30 minutes after sunset or something. So it was pretty dark. One last thing I'll show you just as a tip, and then we can kind of start getting ready to kind of head up there and look around a little bit. So I was shooting with that lens, and let's see, I'm at 100 millimeters. So this does not give me a real shallow depth of field that I wanted. And if I zoomed in, then I've got a problem with, I'm not getting an area around it, right? So basically I turned vertical and shot a series of images. And for those that use Lightroom or don't know, use Lightroom, you can just very quickly, I mean, have you ever done a merge?
I've done a stitching in Corel. Same process.
Yes.
Upload all of them.
Yep.
stitch it.
You just highlight them, photo merge, panorama, and I get this. And then this looks a little over processed, but from there, again, and most of this is all in Lightroom, you can add a sky like that and do this kind of stuff. So, but notice I've got a real shallow depth of field now because I was able to zoom way in, and by stitching together several, was able to get the image that I really wanted to try to get. And I've got a whole collection of sky backgrounds, but I wanted to do all of this in Lightroom just to show, hey, you don't have to go to Photoshop if you don't want to try to do something it's kind of a unique image. It's, you know,
a lot easier to stitch in that than in Photoshop.
yeah, it's kind of automatic. And I don't use, are you familiar with HDR? You know what high
I don't
dynamic,
know what it is. but-
high dynamic range? Essentially, it's where you use your camera, you bracket. You expose for the shadows, expose for the highlights, and a mid-tone usually. And then in here or in Photoshop, you can blend them together. There's also apps that do it. And it picks out the dark pixels and replaces them with lighter pixels from one of the other one. And it's kind of cool. You can get some unique looks with it, but but it also will, sometimes it can go too far and it doesn't look natural to the eye. And you may not want it to look natural to the eye. You may want it to look like something you've created that you really enjoy, that speaks to you. But, okay, Barry, so later on tonight, we're going to take this image and blend it with that one. And that'll be one of the things that we process. And then I want to take, I think it's this one, and that one I've already done some kind of messing around with. Actually, I think it's that image and this image, and just kind of show you blending those. And real quick, notice, see how it moves? Even though I'm on a tripod, I haven't changed my focal length or anything, but see how it kind of moves. That's called, if you have not heard of it before, it's called focus breathing. And it has to do when you change your focus point, it actually shifts some of the lenses inside your lens, some of the glass pieces, the elements, and it does cause a little bit of a focus breathe. So just one thing to be aware of when you're doing focusing on a foreground and then you're going to shoot a background in focus, that when you go to blend them together, you're going to have that to deal with a little bit. And I'll show you a little bit tonight. We'll say, okay, how do we blend that so it looks as natural as possible? And again, this is a case where I'll probably go in and do a little bit of editing just for brightness, and then blend it in Photoshop, and then come back to do final edits in Lightroom. And the point will be to do this. Let me show you over here. Pick a point kind of over near the horizon, and wherever the two images are going to blend together, you're going to want the dark image and the bright image. You're going to want that area to be as similar as possible in terms of brightness, contrast, things of that nature. So before you go into Lightroom, you're going to want to try to get those fairly close, or into Photoshop, get those fairly close, so that when you blend them at that point, they're fairly similar already, so that the transition between them looks relatively smooth. It looks natural. And then as you get away from that point, then there can be dramatic differences between the two different images.
What version of Lightroom are you using?
It's called Classic CC. So what I have, I think it was $9.95 or something to get Lightroom streaming, or not streaming. It's a monthly subscription, and I think it's Lightroom and Photoshop.
When you add Photoshop,
It's
$10 more.
$10 more. I think it's $19.95 or something like that. But the thing about that is that you always have the most current version, and they're constantly updating it with new features and tools and stuff. I have this. I actually have it's $50 a month, but it is their entire package. So I have their video editing, Premiere Pro, auditions, everything. But for the longest time, all I had was Lightroom and Photoshop. Yeah, and it'll give you, it popped up on my screen a while ago. I've got 6 apps to update from Adobe. They're constantly updated. You won't have that many if you just have Lightroom and Photoshop. Won't surprise me if every 6 to 8 weeks you don't get an update. But they're constantly fixing things and adding new features and abilities in them. So it's pretty good. And if you were going to buy the program, within 3 years you'd need to buy it again, because it probably wouldn't work anymore. They won't support it. So there's something called LAB. If you look up there underneath the histogram right there, see the L? It may be hard to see for you guys. LAB, and essentially that's a measure of brightness and color tone. And so I use that a little bit as a guide. So if in this area right here, I know in this picture I'm at 63 in brightness, 62, 63 in this spot right here. And if I was to go to this picture and go to that same spot. I'm at like 32, so I need to bring down a little bit in the other one and bring this one up and try to get it within about 15 or 20 points of each other. And then whenever you blend those together, it'll look a lot cleaner, like it was a single image that was taken and then processed